Hi, welcome along to this week's edition of the Clare Champion Sports Chat podcast. We've given you a break for 1 week anyway of looking at us while we talk, but we'll still bring you the same content that I know that you're waiting there for. Starting off this week, we're going to talk about hurling, and after the break, a very special soccer section of the podcast as well, as Clare look forward to that Oscar Traynor quarter-final on Saturday evening, and a man that knows plenty about Clare soccer and has probably forgotten more than any of the rest of us will ever know in the form of Jim Madden is going to be in with us. We'll start off though with hurling, joined by Fergie O'Loughlin and Peter O'Connell to do just that. And Fergie, I have to say that about 11:10 on Saturday morning, I was wondering, would we have any hurling to talk about this week whatsoever, the way the weather conditions were. We'll talk about all the games and whatever went on in a minute, but firstly, should we be sitting here talking about games given the weather that passed, thunder, lightning, hailstones and everything on Sunday afternoon, and the lads sent out to play? Now I suppose before you answer that, just Brian Lohan and Eddie Brennan both said after the game, yeah, we're happy enough that the game went ahead, but I suppose, what else would they say really?
Yeah, I'm baffled that any games went ahead the weekend. To me it was a no-brainer that all games, once the orange weather warning came into play, especially 24 hours before, it was a no-brainer to call off all games across the board. It's awful unfair on two fronts. When you look at the player situation, I suppose Nescombe to go out and play in those conditions is one thing, but we could be sitting down here today, Derek, talking about a completely different scenario with people travelling to games and the dangerous conditions that supporters had to travel. We were halfway down to Mallow, very, very close to Mallow when it was called off, and the conditions were horrendous, especially in the dual carriageway. It was absolutely horrendous. And the same on Sunday, going to the park. I know probably Laois had travelled at this stage, but once there was an orange weather warning given that weekend, look at all games called off. I've heard so many debates on finding weekends and the club April weekend coming up or the club month coming up in April, but should we turn that all out the window last year when Clare and Limerick went ahead in their first year, given this so-called reprieve to the club month when Clare and Limerick went down to play in the first week in April. But safety is the most important to me, and then you look at the players, it was horrendous conditions. Playing hurling in those conditions, I don't think you'd get a medal for Braveheart kind of stuff going out in those conditions. But as for the skill involved, or as for trying to adapt to the great game that we have, you saw very little of it, and very unfair. And look at, I suppose people voted on their feet that didn't travel to the game, especially in the park. It was a very, very small crowd, and I wouldn't blame them. But all games just should have been cut off in block and refixed, even if it meant some games going midweek under lights. When conditions picked up a little bit, I'd say most county teams wouldn't mind playing a Thursday night under lights when they'd have a training session to be another game, and crowds wouldn't mind going to see a game under lights if a venue became available to inter-county teams. But no, all games should have been called off.
And that just brings me on, Peter, to talk about the midweek thing, because remember the minor B football final here in Clare was played on a Tuesday night, if I'm not mistaken, up in Milltown, St. Brickens and Cora Clare, and I was going down along the sideline, and a fairly prominent official, I won't name him, just said to me, turn around and look up into the stand, and the stand was packed. And he said, isn't it very simple? People had two choices tonight: come out and watch the game, or sit in and watch Fair City. And look what they're after doing. So for all the fixture congestion, and we'll move on from the weather discussion because we've had that, but midweek fixtures surely are the way forward when there's so many fixtures and so little dates.
I think midweek fixtures at club level are probably a bit more likely, as long as the two clubs involved don't have too many players away from home. That's another problem as well. A lot of clubs do have people located in Limerick, Galway, and a lot in Dublin as well, so there can be an issue there. I mean, if you're involved with a team and you have 2 or 3 players in Dublin, it's very hard to expect them to take at least half a day, maybe a full day off work to come and play a club game that evening. So I suppose that has to be taken into account. But I do agree with you that the idea of club games, I think, midweek games is a very good one. I remember another game that Kilmel Shannon Gales were involved in last year, under-21, against Kilmurray in the under-21 football.
Any opportunity to bring that game up,
he's still living in it.
Yeah.
There was a great crowd at it. No, it was a perfect evening. I think it might have been, I forget what date, some date in November. So I mean, it could have been absolutely, Baltic, it could have been Storm, could have been something similar to last weekend, but luckily enough it wasn't. But there was a much bigger crowd at that game than there would have been if the game had been on at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening or 1 o'clock on a Sunday.
There's something about a game under the lights, of a midweek.
Yeah.
There's just some atmosphere.
Do some players not like playing under lights because it's a different scenario?
Well, some players, Derek, will tell you that if they haven't trained underneath them, that they'll find it more difficult to play underneath them. Most clubs now mightn't have the full kind of pitch situation where they have full lights so they could play a full game. Most clubs now have some sort of lighting that they can do ball work and stick work and play a bit of football under some bit of lighting and that. And most clubs, Peter, I think most of them, if they're serious about their team and serious about the preparation, are making them coming home now from Limerick and Galway. Maybe the exception of Dublin, maybe. But
some overseas in London.
Look, most of them are making them come out to train. From Galway to Limericks, and
it will work.
Places.
It's a great idea to play midweek, and it definitely would help. But the key thing is notice. Like, you have to be able to give players a few weeks' notice, like that they might have to take a half day off work, or maybe, depending on where they are, maybe a full day. And 99% of players, look at it, if you're interested, you'll sort it out. You'll get the day off, or you'll get a half day off work if you have to. And if you have to travel, you'll make those arrangements. But there's no point in being told that, on a Friday, look, we're playing a championship game next Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. You have to be here. I mean, everyone will want to be there, but you have to. It's all about planning, and I think that's the key word there. If those things are planned, they can and will work. Yeah.
Two other suggestions, lads, and one I heard Colin Collins bring up on the RTE GA podcast, that he says, like, okay, we had over 70 million euro of a profit with the GA last year, and just to qualify this by saying there was no issue with the pitch in Cusack Park on Sunday. That's been immaculate since they did the work on it, so that wasn't an issue. It was the weather conditions. But Colin was just asking, like, is it possible to maybe have one per province, or maybe one at the moment in a central location, an enclosed stadium? I mean, would that be a feasible option? Because, Greta Thunberg has been telling us long enough the weather isn't going to improve, and it hasn't, and I suppose this is going to become more of a reality.
I think it's definitely a go, and it's the figure of 70 point something million profits from the GA really rose my eyebrows when I saw it, and those kind of things came into my head. The talk about Derek, spreading out most of their profits back down to the grassroots levels first, and back down to the clubs and into the provinces then. But I think that's a real option, is to have a fully enclosed pitch area, starting off with one in each province starting off. I think it's a very, very viable proposal, especially when we look at the profits. And wouldn't it be some facility? I think definitely. I think there's a bit of sense in what Colin is saying there.
Yeah. Would you go with, because this is another discussion that came up, like, would you go with a synthetic surface or a grass surface? I mean, some were saying that it would be maybe more feasible for the GA to dole out a grant to counties to have their own dedicated Astro facility. But then, just as we mentioned that on Twitter earlier this afternoon, David Reedy came back and said that players don't like playing on Astro. He said they don't like training on it, not to mind playing on it. So does that create another?
It does. It does, and you do find if you play in the ordinary AstroTurf, and then there's the synthetic, which is different to the complete AstroTurf. Then, but you do find the difference then when you go down into the grass field from even the synthetic, the different hop of the ball, different pace of the ball, the different legs. You find lads will pick up muscle injuries a lot easier because of moving from different surfaces and things like that. But I'm sure they're all things that are workable within clubs. Again, clubs are making so much strides, Derek, and great credit due to them on their own back, and getting grants, lottery grants and so on and so forth, grants from everything that's available to them. And the way forward is for most clubs now is they do have either synthetic or an AstroTurf facility that's available to them 24/7. And in return, then, if Croke Park decides that one per province is available for indoor, I don't see a problem then with lads adapting to the situation, because most clubs have them now. And you do need a full AstroTurf or a full synthetic surface now, the way weather has gone for training. We see the situation in Carlow where we don't have that facility, and in return most of our county teams are big bar and stealing to get into clubs that have the facilities for them to train. So it is the way forward, and that curves the kind of the conversation of, well, we haven't trained in that surface. So yeah, I think that's the way forward. Yeah.
You're nodding there, yeah.
Yeah, for years that's where Clare have been training, blowing UL. And handing money over, great facility, but handing money to UL, that's okay. It's benefiting Clare GA in the short term, in the sense that our flagship teams have somewhere, a top class place to play in. So I'm not saying it's not worth it. It is if you've nowhere else to train. But like here in Clare, and I'd say in every county, surely the aim should be to have top class facilities no matter what the weather. So no matter what the weather is like, that you have somewhere for your flagship teams to train, to prepare, and even have the odd game as well, so that when it does come to the likes of the month we've had, last couple of weeks we've had, or if there's a few games in January or whatever, or some competitions running late into November and the weather is fairly bad, that at least you'd have that kind of facility. But definitely the AstroTurf wouldn't be a huge fan, because definitely you'd see people picking up a lot of injuries and stuff. It's not a natural surface, so ideally you'd be trying to look for as near a natural surface as you can get. So how feasible that is, does that make it more expensive? I don't know much about that now, but
I think it does. The more synthetic you go closer to grass, the more dearer it gets, obviously. But look, I think it's still a big option for the whole J world going forward, because it looks like I'd hate to have a situation again like we've had this weekend, lads, with asking supporters and asking players to play in horrific conditions, asking people to travel, families to travel to Mallow in very, very dangerous conditions. We could be having a completely different conversation here today. We could be saying who's responsible for a serious accident or tragedy. Thank God it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's wrong. It is very wrong. And in the players' situation, God, I heard Eddie Brennan talking that their players had to go into the showers at half time in Cusick Park to warm up. Like, is that enjoyment? That's torture. That's torture. The crowd in the stand, in the far over stand, the stand up stand in Cusick Park, they were like penguins outside in the Arctic. They were cuddled in together. There was a dive to get to the back of it, that's awful.
Even out the back of the stand was actually flooded. Now it didn't impact on the field or anything like that, but just it showed that.
Yeah, but there was no problem with the field, and Cusick Park is credit to the people in the park that have got it right, because that used to be disaster. But the field conditions are there, has been very, very good. But it's the orange weather warning was given. There should be no games played.
It was a 9-county orange weather warning, and I think if you hear orange, and I think what's happened over the last maybe year or so is we've heard various kind of colour-coded warnings, and we've kind of taken them less and less seriously as they've gone along. And I think there should be a very clear rule within the GA. If you hear, okay, yellow, you get over that, but orange is getting fairly serious,
And but within 24 hours, Peter, they're nearly fairly spot on, aren't
yes,
they?
They are, yeah.
If there's a week in advance, I'd be saying, okay, let it play out until, they're given an orange.
Yeah.
Look, make no decision. But 24 hours in advance, they're fairly spot on.
But you want to make the decision that far in advance.
Correct.
I completely agree with you. Look, a lot of that game on Sunday wasn't about hurling at all. It was about staying
warm.
Somehow staying warm. That no matter whether you were on the ball or off the ball.
Yeah, but this is coming from two lads now that watched it from their couch. This isn't taking into account the people that went out to watch it.
I'll be honest. I would have gone to that game definitely, but
I was in the van ready to go.
Looked out the window
with the young Philippati and both the Lightning, very, very close to, which I don't really like, and it was an on-runner for me. But I'm sure there was many other people in the same scenarios. I love going to games. I travelled to Wexford 2 weeks previous, and I wouldn't go to the park.
There's times where you have to have a little chat with yourself and just,
I think so,
kind of.
Wonder what am I doing?
Yeah. What's it all about?
Time is shoving on. I'm conscious that we haven't gone into talking in too much detail about the games that are coming up. We have all that in the paper on Thursday, so do pick it up. We've got interviews and previews and the whole lot. So you're covered there. Clare Leash obviously in the football, Kenny in the hurling. But I want to just finish up, and we've about 5 minutes to do it. In a story that's brewing. It's not a new one either. Fergie and Peter, both of you will be aware of this. That Camogie and ladies football, they've been pulling each other's hair out literally and figuratively for the last couple of years, and again it's rearing its head this Sunday. The Clare ladies footballers are down to play Meath in Dunbeg at 12 o'clock on Sunday, and the Camogie will be out against Kilkenny most likely after the hurling, which I think in itself is a massive scheduling mistake given what we saw in Limerick a couple of weeks ago. But there's two dual players, Shifra Connell and Niamh D. But incredibly, Peter, what has come out is that the associations have more or less told the counties it's up to you to change around your fixtures. If there's a clash, nothing to do with us. Now, given that they're 50 yards away in a corridor in Croke Park, that just seems incredible.
I can't understand it. I mean, there must be, you'd hope that there must be some logical reason behind this. I have no idea what it is, but you know,
apparently they say that there's now too many dual players between the two codes to centralise it, so it's up to the counties to move fixtures around. But I mean, like, you have the two counties, like in terms of Clare, both managements have been on trying to change fixtures, and like managers have enough to be doing. It's the job of the centralised body to do that.
Yeah, look, there's 2 days in a weekend, as most of us know. So like, why not you know, have even every second round, Saturday could be a Camogie day and Sunday the ladies football day, and then the following set of fixtures the other way around. It still wouldn't be ideal, but it'd be like, this is just ridiculous. And you know, like Niamh D is one of the best sports people in the county, in any sport, and we've a lot of great sports people, and you know, like, it's shown, you know, a complete disrespect to, in Clare's case, to, you know, 2 girls who are obviously talented enough. You know, most people would love to be good enough to play on one county team. These 2 are good enough to be on 2 county teams, 2 county panels. But like, their respective associations are more or less saying, we don't want you playing both sports, because that's what that is doing. It's, let's be honest about it, they're saying, no, we don't want you doing this. You're going to have to pick, and I suppose that's what's going to have to happen, isn't it? Like, like dual players are being ostracised by their own associations. Is that going too far, Fergie?
No, it's not. It's 100%. I think it's absolutely crazy. And look, just listening to a bit of it this morning, where, you know, asking another county to facilitate you when a national body won't decide and make a fixture that's favourable to the player. We talk so much about player welfare and supporting players and helping players and making sure they're enjoying our sports. They're giving so much time to our great sports, and then we have an organisation that decide and give the 2 fingers to the whole thing. And it looks like they don't want people playing both codes. It looks like they say you either pick one or the other, because we're not going to facilitate. It's absolutely crazy stuff. And it happens again and again, year in, year out. We'll be having this debate again on some other front, where you'll see decisions being made by national bodies. The bodies are supposed to be governing our GAA and helping us out and supporting players, making crazy decisions to turn our players miles and miles away from our association. And it's completely wrong. And someday, Derek and Peter, I just hope somebody takes them on. I hope somebody would.
What amazes me is that, like, it should be a top-down approach to sort all this out. But 100%. You look around in Clare, like Clarecastle operate a one-club model, don't they? They're all in together. Newmarket have the same thing. You know, there's several clubs we could mention that do that. And then, to top it off, at county board level here in Clare, we're lucky enough to have somebody that's as diligent and as hard-working as Mary-Louise Kaiser, who's involved in coordinating the fixtures on both sides. So see, here you have your club and your county set up, doing things right. And at the top, they're actively working against that. Like, it makes no sense.
None whatsoever. And it's mind-boggling stuff. Like, and I often wonder, firstly, where do these people come from? Who elects them? Who decides that they're the decision makers? And then the decisions that are made absolutely are crazy. So it's coming from the elected people that are brought into these national bodies that decide. And I don't think they have any idea on the ground what's happening.
Yeah, they have to be out of touch, Fergie, because if they were in touch, or if they had a respect for their players, they wouldn't be making these kind of decisions. They'd be better organised, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe what I mentioned earlier on, I don't know, is that too simplistic, having, you know, a camogie day on a Saturday, ladies football on a Sunday, and then switch it in for the next round of
Following
fixtures.
week,
Well, it makes sense because
yeah.
both as well have TV contracts with TG Clare
Yeah,
because of all these sponsorship deals that are going on, which is great to see. But wouldn't you think that a sponsor would be saying, well, listen, we want to have a day to ourselves whereby we know that people that are supporting women's sport are going to be watching on a Saturday because that's the big day, like. And I think as well we have to say there's huge credit due to James Murray and Ger O'Connell that they're actively working together, and both were at pains to stress the point that this isn't about finding out which game the girls are going to play. That's irrelevant. It's about putting pressure on at the top to get this changed so that they don't have to make that decision again.
But like, they shouldn't have to spend this week involved in that kind of scenario, you know. They have enough to be doing, and they're doing their level best, and it's great to have people of that quality involved with the county teams, but they should be concentrating this week on coaching, getting the team ready, getting their team set up, and not have to worry about this absolute nonsense. I just can't believe that this is still happening, you know.
More of that in the paper on Thursday, as we said. So we have to leave our GA discussion for the moment. Fergie, thanks for joining us as ever. We'll be talking as the year goes on, no doubt. Do stay tuned though, because coming up next we have Jim Madden here in studio to talk to us about a massive weekend for Clare soccer. You're very welcome back to the second half of this week's Champion Sports Chat podcast. As we told you before the break, we're turning our attentions to soccer now, because this weekend is a massive one for Clare at inter-county level, from under 13 upwards. The 13s, as you'll have read in the paper, up in Mullingar for that SFAI Subway Championship Plate final. You can read more about that in this week's edition of the Clare Champion. But on Saturday in Frank Park out in Dura, it's the Oscar Traynor quarter final. It's Clare versus Wexford. You'll have seen the previews in the paper, but to get an informed opinion from a man that has seen more Oscar Traynor finals, I think, than probably anybody else in the county, really, Mr. Jim Madden. Jim, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, big weekend.
It's a big weekend, and there's a lot of things in that final as well, or that quarter final, in that the first time that Wexford ever won the Oscar Traynor, they won it at the county ground in 2010, and there's a number of the players from that still on their team as well. I think, I'm not too sure how many we'd have, and of course then in the 17-18 season, when we won the Oscar Traynor, we beat Wexford down in Wexford in the semi-final, and they'll have one or two people from a number from that team. Sorry, it'll be from that team more than the previous time that'll be in the game on Saturday. So there'll be plenty of competitiveness. They'll feel that they have something to prove again. And the fact that their main club, North End, which similar to Newmarket here, have dominated the scene down in Wexford for a number of years and won the FAI Junior Cup in 2018, they are out of it this year, even though they still have a club in it, Gorey, and there'll be a number of their players, including Paul Murphy, will be playing as well. And there is a couple of others, Gary Delaney and Shane Dempsey, also in the team as well. And I think the goalkeeper from back those days, when they played as Lee Walker, is also likely to feature.
Okay, so it's a fixture with a lot of history, and we'll talk about it in more detail in just a second. But people will also have read our new soccer columnist in the Clare Champion this week, Liam Murphy, of course, a man with plenty experience at Clare, Oscar Traynor level as a player and a manager, and indeed with Newmarket Celtic as well. But Liam was just kind of making the point, Jim, in terms of the standard of Clare soccer, and I guess the momentum maybe behind Clare soccer as well, with the Oscar Traynor in mind. You mentioned FAI and Munster Junior Cups, and unfortunately, you know, it wasn't a long period for Clare clubs in those outside competitions, and with the weather we've had the last couple of weeks, you know, players wouldn't have had maybe much competitive action at a high end. Does that put you at a small bit of a disadvantage?
It does. There's no doubt junior players need to be playing all the time. And that's what they want to do, is play all the time. Unfortunately, the season over the last number of weeks, and it has been nobody's fault other than the weather that we've had, and we've had some dreadful weather that you couldn't put people out, has meant that they haven't really had games, and you need competitive games. I would think Newmarket's last real competitive game was actually down in Munster Junior when they played Waterford Crystal, and that would have been 3 weeks ago now. So that, and none of the training makes up for a competitive game.
Yeah, and I guess, like, and in fairness, it's one thing we've said. People that were listening before the break would have heard us talking about the GA and not cutting off fixtures on time and all that. And I think a lot of credit has to go to the Clare Soccer League executive for doing that. I mean, the call came on Saturday afternoon that the Sunday games were gone, so at least lads had a chance to regroup. Now we know that Clare played Avenue Selection in a training session there on Sunday morning, so that'll have primed them just a little bit. But it seems as if they're not afraid to call in guys to see them and to have a look at them. I know there's a Kieran O'Donoghue that people will know. I've an old connection with myself. We won't go into that, but he's with Kilrush Rangers at the moment, and he was called in by Dennis Hines to have a look at him. So I mean, often you can find that kind of diamond in the rough in that way as well.
You can indeed, and it's very, very important that players, no matter what club they're with, that they feel that they have an opportunity to get a bit of recognition. That not alone that, but they can get to be involved in a training session with different people. And I think that's very, very important, and the coaching. And there is no doubt that Shane Keegan has a tremendous reputation as a coach, and a very high reputation, particularly with young players and that. And I think that's very, very important for younger guys coming from the various clubs to see what's been done at the top level. And I gather recently Shane Keegan did speak at some very big important coaching seminar as well. So this is a man well worth watching how he does things, but he'd also be well worth listening to as well.
Yeah, and what struck me actually was, as people will know, Donny Garrihy is still part of the management team, even though Shane has taken the manager's seat as such. But just talking to Donny on Sunday morning, like, and if Donny Garrihy is impressed by somebody, then you know that they're an impressive person. And he was kind of saying that Shane has been given the gig with Dundalk FC of going around scouting the various opponents and setting up Dundalk's second team to mimic what the opponents will do. So this is obviously a guy with a really in-depth soccer knowledge.
Yes, indeed, he has. And I mean, he started his career, if I'm right, over in the Kilkenny Carlow area. And then he went to Wexford Youths for a number of years. If I'm right, that he brought the Wexford Youths to the League of Ireland as well, and had about a number of years there with them. And then he was appointed by Galway United. Now, it does appear as if at Galway things didn't work out quite as well as he would have liked, but it does look as if the backroom team, or the support managed structure at Galway left a bit to be desired. And for a man of his ability and professionalism, that he wouldn't work with that too long. So, but he is a man, I think, that has tremendous ability, and I think that Clare should actually be trying to use him more than not alone just at the Oscar trainer level, but wouldn't he be brilliant if he was involved at youths level as well?
In a kind of a director style role, is it?
A director style role, because it's at that stage, the 17-18 bracket, that I think that young fellas get the discipline attitude, what training is about, what it's like, and that to be a success at it, how important it is to be totally dedicated to it.
Mm-hmm. The Oscar Trainer campaign to date, obviously we've one loss, 2 wins that got you the home quarter final. I guess you have to commend the squad that bounced back from an opening day defeat to do what Clare did, and I suppose no strangers to doing it on the road either, which they had to in that Limerick Desmond.
Well, for some reason Clare teams always seem to perform better away from home, and the Oscar Trainer team has been the case in point. God knows how many trips and how many places we played in. I don't think there's too many counties in the country that we haven't played in, from Donegal to Dublin and Wexford and Waterford and Tipperary and Cork and Mayo and whatever.
That famous Oscar Trainer final up in Derry, wasn't it?
In Buncrana. And I mean, the great thing about those games is I think it allows a squad to get a kind of togetherness, and because they spend time together, which they don't always do when they're at home. And it gets rid maybe of the club rivalry, which is healthy and has to be there. So by travelling away, they have meals together, and they're travelling in the bus together. They're probably playing a few games of cards. They're listening to music, complaining about this guy and other guy's taste. And that to me is what it's about. And they did play well down in the Desmond League. The Desmond League are no slouches. I mean, they hammered Limerick 4-0, and they were very disappointed to lose that night by, was it 3 goals to 2 or 2 goals to 1? 2 goals to 1. And I think that defensively we are now very solid again. We went through a patch there for a while where maybe after the Buncrana Oscar Trainer game, when we really were superb at the back, and it kind of broke up a little bit. But I think next Saturday evening you'll have Shane Cusick in goal, you'll have Conor Mullen more than likely at right back, and I think that you will probably have Owen O'Brien at left back, and then you'll have Dylan Casey and Stephen Kelly coming in at centre half. Now, it's a bit tough maybe on Aidan Leahy, who is playing well for Shannon Town, but you'd have to imagine that it's a choice that a manager has to make, maybe, and we'll see how he does there. The loss that I feel and caught my eye big time in the Desmond League was Keane O'Dea, and I'm told that he won't be available. Another player that played very well, and I think a lot will depend on him against Wexford, was Mark Roach, who played wide on the right against the Desmond League. Really is a very talented player. And I think the county ground will suit him as well, because it has plenty of size and width for a winger, because the wingers love space. It'll be very interesting to see how he deals with the left back from Wexford then.
Absolutely. We'll park that for just a second, because I suppose one thing that a lot of people have spoken about, and you just briefly touched on it there when mentioning Limerick, we know a couple of years ago it was Janesborough as a club represented Limerick in the Oscar Traynor, and across the local leagues, has it lost its prestige a little bit in terms of how they view it? We know in Clare it's always held in high esteem, as it should be. Obviously, it's a national competition, but have some leagues maybe perhaps lost interest or maybe lost resources to put into it, or what do you put it down to? Because I know there was a major restructure, wasn't there maybe 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, they're trying to. Some of the leagues kind of are inclined to complain about the cost of travelling and all of that, which I think is a load of rubbish, to be honest with you. It's okay, it costs money to travel and to look after a team properly. That's the responsibility of a league. But what was happening, and the excuse the leagues were given, was that the more successful clubs were more interested in winning Munster Junior Cups and the FAI Junior Cup, and the demands of that. And probably it means that it's like in a lot of sports now, the fixture list is maybe a little bit congested and needs to be, maybe some of the leagues need to drop some of the competitions they have or give the top clubs a choice of what they'll play in, and particularly as they go forward in the Munster Junior, which would be the thing down this part of the world, or the FAI, because it is very important. It's recognition for the players as well, getting a good position on the FAI Junior Cup and in the Munster Junior Cup. And of course, it's nice to have an outside medal rather than just not alone to add to your local trophies.
Yeah, and as we know, there's plenty of clubs in Clare would take your left hand off at a chance for one of those, as Liam touched on in his piece. Just as we talk about that, Jim, what's your take on, I suppose, where Clare club soccer stands at the moment? I mean, maybe this season, I suppose, in particular, maybe we have something of a head-to-head in the Premier Division with Avenue and Newmarket. Whenever that 6-minute saga will be sorted out, we'll have a lot more idea in terms of where the points stand and all that. But I suppose at least it's staying interesting, it's staying intriguing.
It is indeed, and I mean it's also quite competitive at the bottom of the table as well, because I mean nobody wants to be relegated to the first division, because the first division is incredibly competitive as well, mainly dominated unfortunately by B teams, Newmarket B, Avenue B, and that kind of I think this season has been a bit too stop-start in my book. You need a run of games all the time now. In the Premier League this year, we have 3 teams out of Shannon, and with the best will in the world, I don't think there's enough players to. It spreads the player pool in my book a little bit too thin. Shannon Olympic, the club that I look after, their pitch are in 2nd or 3rd position. Shannon Town probably are just a little bit behind them, and then there's Shannon Hibs. Hibs were the last team, if I think, to go out of an outside competition recently, but there is probably the need as well for some one of the clubs to stick their neck out and get a full-size AstroTurf. That would mean that you could keep players moving with competitive games all the time. And there is no doubt, with the kind of weather we've had over the last 2-3 winters now, that the seasons are being interrupted. This year has been worse, I think, than others, because we've had storm conditions on a more frequent basis, you know. Yeah. So, and a full-size AstroTurf controlled by the soccer league is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that needs to be done. Yeah,
because I know there's obviously a lot of games played out in Leeds Road, and that probably books up pretty quickly.
It does book up very quickly. Yeah. And I mean, younger players as well need to be regularly, because we were just talking there about Shane Keegan being a coach. Well, he needs to be able to bring players to where there's a good surface as well to train, because a club, if they have a grass pitch and the weather is like this, they're always going to want, naturally enough, to protect it. So you don't want to be training on your pitch that you're playing on. And so it's a catch-22. It's a difficult situation, but I think there needs to be a plan.
Yeah, you mentioned it there. We'll finish up on this, but the B team thing seems to be a massive discussion among Clare soccer people. Now, people that are involved will know that B teams can't compete in the Premier Division. You can't have two teams from the one club competing in the same division. So what it'll mean is that even if Avenue B, which they look at the moment, win the First Division title, they won't get promotion. They'll stay where they are. So then you go back to third, fourth and fifth to sort out all your promotion stuff. And while that's great, I guess, for those clubs, is that something that needs to be looked at? Or, I mean, it's probably there for a reason, isn't it, that you'd have to declare your two squads? Or what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, for the last 3 years, of course, Newmarket B have won the First Division, and it became an ambition of theirs to keep winning it. I mean, you can't take that away from a B team. But the fact that they can't be promoted makes life very difficult for them, in the sense that, but yet they are a B team. So therefore, theoretically, they should be there to help and support the A team. And it should, naturally enough, then be A teams in the Premier League. Once you start to go back from the top 2 or 3 in the First Division, you find then that it becomes a lottery, and these are the clubs that tend to get beaten, and sometimes very heavily, by the other teams. And that then makes life, it turns off players a bit. Yeah,
because I know there was a discussion at one stage that I think some clubs had almost been promoted by accident, if that makes sense, in that they hadn't finished in the top 2 but saw themselves finishing 3 and 4th, went to the Premier Division but may not have felt that they were ready for it, and as you mentioned, suffered some big losses and came back down. And sometimes that can have maybe more of a detrimental impact than actually not getting promoted in the first place.
It can indeed. I mean, because their attitude is, we've nothing really to play for here. Once they'd say they might win their own divisional cup. But the big thing again is the Clare Junior Cup. That's the blue ribbon of Clare soccer, and that's what they want to win. So, like last year we had Newmarket A and B. This year the B team was out. Now they did come a cropper against a very good Connolly team down there one day in Newmarket. Surprised a lot of people. It was not a great day for football, but it's the same for both teams. And Connolly were very, very good. Well worth their 3-1 win. And they had a player up front, Aidan Kennedy, and he really was a joy to watch. So, and they're playing out of the second or third division, if I'm right.
Yeah. I think they're top of the third division at the moment. They beat Inch Crusaders in that all-parish derby that went viral a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't look too much at the social media, but it was great. Now, that was a great thing to see, in the sense of you weren't from, and I was in Newmarket that day, and it was great to see, yes, there's players of that calibre. Now, I don't know whether he has been brought into the Oscar Traynor squad or not, or whether, because I gather he is involved in hurling as well. But, I thought his ability on the ball, and there was also a player that played wide with Connolly that day. He played wide on the left. And by God, he had pace and could deliver across as well. So there is players scattered around the divisions. Now, maybe we should be trying to get some of these players together, so that the 2 or 3 players never makes a team, as you know. So therefore, you need to maybe try and have some amalgamation process or something like that.
Yeah, we'll press pause on that, because that's a discussion all of its own. It's Jim, your time is against us. Just in a quick word, do we win on Saturday?
I think we have a very good chance. I was in, as I said, the team had to work hard down in Askeaton against the Desmond League, and I think the addition of Stephen and the 2 Owens will make a big difference. Owen Hayes is, I gather, fully fit now, and looked very good on Sunday and very sharp. He hasn't had a lot of games this year, and I think Stephen and Owen O'Brien is very reliable as well. Before we go, Derek, I'd like to mention, because there is another very important game on Saturday in Galway in the FAI Under-17 Cup. Tulla United are playing Merview, and that's a quarter-final. Tremendous for them. They beat Shannontown in a previous round, and then in the last round they beat a very strong College Corinthians from Cork, who they really had to work very hard. And there is no doubt that Mike Maloney has put a very well disciplined, well organised squad together. And I hope that people, it's a terrible pity that the two games are clashing in a sense. Somebody said if you had a helicopter, Jim, you'd be fine. But that game is at 2:00 in Merview, and I would imagine a big crowd of people will travel from Tulla. And hopefully some people that maybe aren't able to go to the county ground might ramble up to Galway as well.
Absolutely. Best of luck to everybody involved. Jim, thanks for coming into us there. That's Jim Madden looking ahead to all this weekend's soccer action, as he said. Extensive previews in this week's edition of the Clare Champion. You can pick it up along with previews of all the National League action, football, hurling, camogie, the whole lot covered, ladies football as well, and plenty more besides in the paper. Do pick it up. We'll talk to you again next week.